As popular as superhero movies are, it's fair to say the characters in them are rarely completely faithful depictions of the versions presented in the comic books. They often look different, have different origins, different powers, or different personalities. In some cases, all four of those differences apply. This notion even applies in the incredibly popular Marvel Cinematic Universe, including in the case of the franchise's heroic characters. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at that particular idea. These MCU heroes were completely changed for their respective movies. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's the best way of keeping up to date with all of our great new videos. Also, during the video, can you count how many times Superman randomly appears? Stick around until the end to find out if you counted correctly.
Guys, stop. We gotta talk this through. It's good talk.
No, it wasn't.
Iron Man. Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man is a shining example that changing characters from comics can work brilliantly in a movie. Tony Stark is the charismatic flagship character in the MCU, and the main reason the franchise exists at all. He's so popular that it barely gets mentioned that he's nothing like the classic character from the comics. The MCU version of Stark has certainly had his issues, but not to the dark extent that the comic book version has had them. Comic book Stark is a genuine alcoholic. There's even a storyline called Demon in a Bottle. And while MCU Stark drinks, he comes across as more of a party animal than a booze-reliant lost cause. That's not the only difference between the versions, however. MCU Stark's relationship with Pepper Potts simply didn't happen in the comics. The pair like each other and have kissed, but they were never actually together. In fact, Potts' most well-known relationship was with Happy Hogan, who Jon Favreau plays in the MCU. Stark also has far more versatile armors in the comics. He didn't create Ultron, and he's been a member of other superhero teams like the Guardians of the Galaxy. But there's no denying how awesome Downey Jr.'s character is. He just can't do any wrong, even if 2 out of 3 of his solo movies were actually awful.
Then bring it down hard. Someday, put it together.
What are you doing?
Dance off, bro. Me and you.
Star-Lord. Chris Pratt's Star-Lord has every chance of becoming the face of the MCU once Robert Downey Jr. departs. That's just how popular he is. The leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Peter Quill, is funny, cocky, and charismatic, but he's nothing like the comic book version of the character. Comic book Quill is quite cocky, but he doesn't possess the humor and wit of Pratt's version. However, the biggest difference between the two versions is Quill's family heritage. The MCU presented Ego the Living Planet as Quill's father, Ego being a celestial who wanted to experience love. So he headed to Earth in human form and founded with Quill's mother. In the comics, Quill has a completely different father, Jason of Spartax, a far less powerful individual. His childhood was different as well. His mother was murdered by 2 Badoon soldiers, both of whom young Peter killed with a shotgun. She didn't have a brain tumor. Comic book Quill also ended up in space in completely different fashion. He joined NASA and became an astronaut, and the Ravagers captured him after his ship became stranded up in space. They weren't sent to Earth to pick him up when he was a boy. We wouldn't have MCU Quill any other way though. He's every bit as awesome as his mixtapes.
But we need to go.
Vision. Vision is, of course, the red and green android who became a member of the Avengers in 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron. Played by Paul Bettany, he is undoubtedly one of the team's most powerful individuals. He's become pretty popular, and that's in spite of the fact that he's a very different character to the Vision in the comics. MCU Vision came to life as a mishmash of components, having initially been built by Ultron as a new form for himself. He ended up in the hands of the Avengers. His synthetic body was created using vibranium. His personality was formed by uploading the remnants of Tony Stark's personal AI, Jarvis, into it. He has the Mind Stone embedded into his forehead, and he was brought to life by Thor's lightning. In the comics, though, Vision's mind was based on the brain patterns of Wonder Man, a superhero character who, at least at this moment in time, doesn't actually exist in the MCU. He was, however, built by Ultron like he was in the MCU, as the villain created him to use against Hank Pym, his own creator. Both versions of the character can fly, possess superhuman physical attributes, can control their own density, project powerful energy blasts, and interact with computers. And it's a tough call as to which is the most powerful. They're both really cool though. And that, as we all know, is the main thing.
Yes! I have single-handedly vanquished the beast!
Drax. Dave Bautista's Drax the Destroyer is one of the most surprising success stories of the two brilliant Guardians of the Galaxy movies. You really don't tend to associate former WWE wrestlers with great acting performances, but he's been fantastic in the MCU so far. His quirk of taking everything literally provides plenty of laughs, and he's a very capable fighter who is particularly good with knives. But he's nothing like the comic book version of the character. In the comics, Drax is an artificially created being. Thanos' grandfather, Cronin, took the spirit of a human by the name of Arthur Douglas, a man whose family was attacked and killed by his prune-chinned grandson, and placed it inside a powerful new body. A body designed with a specific purpose of killing the Mad Titan. Like Bautista's version, he possesses superhuman physical attributes, but he can also detect the location of other living beings, particularly Thanos, and can fire energy blasts. He also has a very different personality and doesn't, for example, take everything said to him literally. Rather than being someone who is created artificially, Bautista's version is essentially just a green-skinned alien. His only link to Thanos comes from the fact that the Mad Titan killed his beloved wife and daughter, something the muscle-bound whack job has vowed to get revenge for. And muscle-bound whack job, those were Star-Lord's words, not ours.
Dr. Pym?
Yes, I'm still alive.
Hank Pym. When Michael Douglas was cast as Hank Pym in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, eyebrows were certainly raised. While Douglas was a fantastic coup for the franchise, he would also be 71 years of age when the first Ant-Man movie was released in 2015, and that immediately indicated to fans of the franchise that MCU Pym would be very different from the comic books. Comic book Pym is typically a relatively young man and a founding member of the Avengers, so for him to be depicted as a former superhero in his 60s or 70s and not a founding member of the Avengers in the MCU was quite bizarre. While comic book Pym can be lighthearted and cocky, he's also a much darker and more tragic figure than his MCU counterpart. In the comics, it was Pym who was responsible for the creation of Ultron, not Tony Stark like it was in the movies. And in addition to the guilt he regularly experiences over that, he also has to deal with the fact that he has beaten his wife Janet on several occasions over the years. Although he didn't lose her in the quantum realm like in the MCU version, which has to count for something. In the future, we may learn more about Douglas's version of the character that mirrors the character he's based on. But for now at least, they are very, very different people. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. So far in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the movies in the franchise have been unable to use the word mutant because Fox previously owned the rights to all X-Men properties, and mutants certainly fall under that category. In the comic books, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver have classically been presented as mutants, yet they've appeared in the MCU. Obviously, there would have to be changes. In Avengers Age of Ultron, having previously been introduced in the mid-credits scene of 2014's Captain America: The Winter Soldier, it was made clear that the twins received their powers from Hydra experimenting on them with the Mind Stone, and that they were the orphans of nondescript Eastern European parents. That's a lot different from the comics, as the mutant gene meant that they were originally born with their powers, but their X-Men connections ran even deeper than that. They were also the children of X-Men's greatest foe, Magneto. Scarlet Witch is also nowhere near as powerful in the MCU, at least not so far, but that could certainly change as she masters her powers. In recent years, there has actually been a retcon revealing the twins weren't actually mutants, but were kidnapped and used in genetic experiments by the High Evolutionary, then misled to believe Magneto was their father. Most people try to forget about that, however, because it's ridiculous.
Stark, got a lot of stray sniff in your tail.
Just trying to keep him off the streets.
Well, they can't bank worth a damn. Find a tight corner.
Hawkeye. Jeremy Renner's Clint Barton AKA Hawkeye isn't actually that much different from his comic book counterpart of the same name, as far as his abilities are concerned, but the obvious difference comes in the form of their superhero costumes. The comic book version of Barton wears an iconic purple costume that includes an extremely flamboyant mask and headwear. Renner's version, however, wears a much more sensible-looking black S.H.I.E.L.D-issued uniform that makes him stand out less and is, quite frankly, much less silly. A lot of people would definitely love to see him wearing his comic book costume on screen, and it might just happen in the future, but the reality is that it's very impractical and probably wouldn't look too good in live action. One of the big twists in Avengers Age of Ultron also revealed another difference from the comic books. Hawkeye lives on a farm and has a wife and kids. In the comics, the character has no children, although he was once married to a fellow Avenger in the form of Mockingbird, who is actually a character on the MCU spin-off show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D, where she's played by Adrienne Palicki, but it's very unlikely we'll ever see that relationship happen in live action. Adam Warlock. Now, there's not a lot to say about the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Adam Warlock, because he hasn't even been seen on screen yet in the franchise. What we can say is that we already know he's going to be very different to the comic book version of the character. In one of the many mid-credit scenes of 2017's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, the Sovereign High Priestess Ayesha unveiled a birthing pod and announced that within it, there was a perfect being growing who would go on to destroy the Guardians once he was born. Ayesha said his name would be Adam, and it's been confirmed that he would be the Adam Warlock of the MCU. In the comics, Warlock was actually created on Earth by a group of scientists called the Enclave, who sought to create a perfect human, and Ayesha was actually later created as a female replicant. Warlock rebelled against his creators, came into conflict with Thor, then fled into space. His powers include superhuman physical attributes, energy manipulation capabilities, and teleportation. It isn't known whether the MCU version will possess the same abilities, but his origins are certainly completely different to the character he's based on, and we're sure to find out in the future what he's capable of, and what hilarious nicknames the likes of Star-Lord and Rocket have in store for him. Valkyrie. 2017's Thor Ragnarok was an absolute blast from start to finish, and that was largely thanks to its awesome cast of characters. One of those characters who was making her Marvel Cinematic debut in the movie was Valkyrie, played by Tessa Thompson. She was cool as hell, but she was very different to the version depicted in the comics. The original Valkyrie, who's also known as Brunhilde, is a white, blonde Asgardian who led the elite all-female army known as the Valkyrier. She's a straight-laced warrior who has been a lover of Thor and a member of both the Defenders and the Secret Avengers. In the MCU, however, while she used to lead the Valkyrier, she is the last surviving member, having witnessed Hela slaughter the others, one of whom may have been her lover, and she ended up on Sakaar, where she became one of the Grandmaster's primary warriors, under the name Scrapper 142, and befriended the Hulk. MCU Valkyrie is an alcoholic and something of a sadist, which helps her to cope with her PTSD and unattainable hope of running away from her problems and memories. Thompson's version is also bisexual and most pertinently black, which was a huge step in Hollywood given the perceived tendency of roles in comic book movies being whitewashed.
Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Korg. I'm kind of like the leader in here. I'm made of rocks, as you can see, but don't let that intimidate you. You don't need to be afraid unless you're made of scissors.
Korg. As awesome as Valkyrie and many of the other characters in Thor Ragnarok were, none were as popular as another newcomer in the form of Korg. Korg is a member of the Kronan race, a race of rock-like beings with superhuman strength and durability, both in the comic books and the MCU. Comic book Korg was introduced in 2006's Planet Hulk storyline, and MCU Korg was part of the Planet Hulk-esque subplot in Thor Ragnarok, and both were presented as gladiators. But pretty much everything else about the two versions differs greatly. For starters, MCU Korg is a sort of bluey-gray color, while comic book Korg is a sandy yellow. MCU Korg also has a very different personality to his comic book counterpart. Being voiced by director Taika Waititi meant he was always going to be comic relief, and that was definitely the case. He described Loki's magical hologram as a ghost and told him to piss off, and spoke about handing out pamphlets for goodness sake. The original version was far more serious and, frankly, nowhere near as entertaining or likable. If there's one character MCU fans would love to see more of in the future, it's definitely Korg. And if that doesn't prove that making changes from the comics can be a positive thing in the movies, nothing ever will. And that's the end of our video. Did you enjoy it? Which other MCU heroes were very different to their comic book counterparts? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more great videos just like this one. And the number of times Superman randomly appeared was, well, we hope you had fun counting. Bye for now.